Welcome fam. Before we dive into the story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. Sarah Mitchell had always been the golden child, valedictorian, pre-med honor student, the daughter who made her parents beam with pride at dinner parties. Sarah's going to be a surgeon, her mother would announce, voice dripping with satisfaction. But by her third year of medical school, the pressure had carved her hollow. The endless studying, the competition, the weight of everyone's expectations. It all collapsed in a moment of devastating clarity during her surgery rotation. She couldn't do it anymore. Walking away felt like stepping off a cliff, but staying felt like dying slowly. Her parents' disappointment was immediate and crushing. Her father stopped mentioning her accomplishments entirely, while her mother began introducing her as taking some time to figure things out. Meanwhile, her younger brother David seamlessly filled the void, graduating with honors in engineering, landing a prestigious job, getting engaged to a lawyer. Sarah became the cautionary tale, the what could have been whispered about at family gatherings. The label of family disappointment settled over Sarah like a heavy coat she couldn't remove. Sunday dinners became exercises in invisibility where she perfected the art of nodding politely while conversations flowed around her achievements as if they didn't exist. David's been promoted again, her mother would beam, while Sarah sat cutting her vegetables in practiced silence. The family had rewritten her story without asking. She was now the unfocused one, the dreamer, the daughter who'd lost her way. Even distant relatives knew the narrative. Sarah had given up on her future to chase something insignificant. She learned to expect the pitying looks, the careful way people avoided asking about her career, the subtle exclusion from conversations about ambition and success. At family photos, she naturally gravitated toward the back, understanding her role as the supporting character in everyone else's success stories. The silence became her armor, protecting her from having to defend choices that felt too personal and too complicated to explain to people who had already decided what her story meant. What started as desperation became discovery. Sarah began tutoring elderly residents in her neighborhood with basic computer skills, initially just to pay rent and fill the hollow hours. Mrs. Chun, 83 and determined to email her grandchildren in Taiwan, became her first real student. The work required infinite patience, explaining email attachments 15 times, celebrating the small victory of a successfully sent photo, teaching the difference between reply and reply all with the gentleness of a meditation teacher. Something unexpected happened in those coffee shop sessions. Sarah found herself energized in ways medical school had never achieved. Each breakthrough, whether helping someone video call family or navigate online banking, felt profoundly meaningful. She wasn't saving lives in an operating room, but she was connecting them across distances and generations. The work grew organically. One satisfied student led to another, coffee shop sessions became library workshops, and whispered recommendations spread through senior communities like wildfire. What her family saw as computer tutoring for old people was actually becoming something much larger, though Sarah kept the scope of her growing mission quietly to herself. 3 years after leaving medical school, Sarah had built something remarkable. Her program, which she'd named Bridge Digital, served over 1,200 seniors across 3 states. She developed specialized curricula for different skill levels, partnered with libraries and community centers, and created online resources that accommodated various physical limitations. The testimonials poured in daily. Stories of grandparents reconnecting with family, elderly people regaining independence through online banking and shopping, isolated seniors finding community through social media. Sarah had hired 4 part-time instructors and was developing partnerships with senior living facilities. Her program had a 93% satisfaction rate and a waiting list that stretched months. She'd been featured in the local newspaper twice and invited to speak at a national conference on aging and technology. Yet at family gatherings, her work remained Sarah's little computer thing. She'd built something beautiful from the ashes of her supposed failure, but the people who mattered most to her remained willfully blind to its significance, trapped in their own narrow definitions of success and meaning. The cruelest irony was that Sarah could transform the lives of complete strangers while remaining invisible to her own family. She could take a 70-year-old widow who'd never touched a keyboard and guide her to confident video calls with distant children. Yet her parents had never once asked for details about her work beyond polite, dismissive inquiries. In the outside world, Sarah was gaining recognition, conference invitations, media interviews, grant opportunities. Senior center directors called her a godsend, and families sent heartfelt thank you notes describing how she'd given them back their loved ones' confidence and connection. But at David's birthday party, she still sat at the far end of the table while relatives praised his latest promotion and asked detailed questions about his work. The contrast was jarring and painful. She had found her calling in helping people feel seen and valued, yet she remained fundamentally unseen by the people whose approval she'd once craved. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd become an expert at making others feel heard while mastering the art of staying silent about her own achievements. The connection came from an unexpected direction. At David's engagement party, Sarah was introduced to his fiancée Emma's grandmother, Rose, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who immediately lit up when she heard Sarah's name. "You're the Sarah Mitchell? From Bridge Digital." Rose's voice carried across the room with surprise and delight. The conversation that followed was surreal. Rose had been one of Sarah's early online students, participating in virtual workshops during the pandemic when in-person classes weren't possible. She spoke passionately about how Sarah's program had helped her stay connected during lockdown, learn online banking, and even start a blog about her garden. "She saved my sanity during the worst year of my life," Rose told Emma within earshot of Sarah's parents. The family listened with growing confusion as Rose described Sarah's program in detail: the thoughtful curriculum, the patient instructors, the national recognition, the hundreds of lives changed. Emma's eyes widened as she realized her future sister-in-law was someone her grandmother spoke about with genuine reverence, not the family disappointment she'd been led to expect. The truth entered the room without fanfare, carried in Rose's authentic gratitude and detailed knowledge of Sarah's work. As Rose continued sharing her experience with Bridge Digital, describing specific lessons and breakthrough moments, the family's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Sarah's mother sat frozen as Rose mentioned Sarah's recent conference presentation and the waiting list of seniors desperate to join her programs. Her father's expression shifted from polite interest to dawning realization that his daughter had built something substantial, something that mattered deeply to people like Rose. Emma turned to Sarah with new eyes, asking direct questions about the program's scope and impact. For the first time in years, Sarah found herself explaining her work to family members who were actually listening, actually seeing her. The revelation wasn't dramatic or confrontational, it was simply the truth finally getting space to breathe. Sarah hadn't demanded recognition or fought for visibility. She'd simply continued building something meaningful until it became too significant to ignore. The light had been there all along, waiting for someone like Rose to help others see it clearly. The aftermath was quieter than Sarah had expected. No dramatic apologies or tearful reconciliations, instead, small shifts that felt more substantial than grand gestures. Her father began asking specific questions about her work, requesting details about curriculum development and program metrics with the same intensity he'd once reserved for David's engineering projects. Her mother, initially embarrassed by her previous dismissiveness, started mentioning Bridge Digital to friends with genuine pride, though she was clearly still learning how to talk about her daughter's unconventional success. David apologized privately, admitting he'd never bothered to ask about her work because he'd assumed it wasn't real career material. The family dynamics didn't transform overnight, but there was a new recognition in their interactions. Sarah was no longer the disappointment taking up space, but a person who had built something meaningful from scratch. At the next family dinner, she wasn't relegated to the invisible corner, but included in conversations about professional challenges and future goals. The change felt organic rather than forced, growing from genuine understanding rather than obligatory politeness. The healing happened in increments through genuine curiosity rather than dramatic revelations. Emma became an unexpected ally, asking thoughtful questions about digital literacy education and sharing stories from her grandmother's progress in the program. Sarah's parents began reading articles about technology and aging, trying to understand the field their daughter had entered. Her father, a former engineer, was particularly intrigued by the technical challenges of creating user-friendly interfaces for seniors with varying physical limitations. They visited one of Sarah's workshops, watching her teach with patience and expertise, seeing firsthand the respect and affection her students showed her. These small moments of recognition meant more than any grand apology could have. Sarah realized that true reconciliation wasn't about having her family acknowledge past blindness, but about them choosing to see her clearly moving forward. The relationships were rebuilding slowly, based on genuine interest and mutual respect rather than obligation and expectation. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she belonged at the family table not as a reformed disappointment, but as someone whose path had simply been different from what they'd expected. 2 years later, Sarah stood before an audience of 300 at a national conference on technology and aging, accepting an award for innovation in senior education. Her parents sat in the third row, her father recording every word on his phone, her mother beaming with pride that looked different from her old golden child satisfaction. This was deeper, more authentic, earned through understanding rather than expectation. Sarah's speech was characteristically humble, focusing on her students' courage in embracing new technology rather than her own achievements. But as applause filled the auditorium, she felt something she'd never experienced during her medical school accolades: complete alignment between who she was and who the world saw her to be. Bridge Digital now served over 5,000 seniors nationally, had partnerships with major health systems, and had inspired similar programs across the country. The girl who'd been labeled a failure had found her own light and learned to trust it completely. She no longer needed anyone else's recognition to know her worth, though having it felt like a warm embrace rather than validation. The most powerful journey had indeed been the one no one saw coming, including herself. If you've watched this far, drop your thoughts in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who might be interested. Thank you for watching.